couple of weeks ago, I decided to test my 1-rep max. If you've been watching the channel for a while, you probably know that I've done some powerlifting competitions, and this is nothing really new to me. With that said, of course, I don't test my 1-rep max very often, and this past summer, I was on a cut. Since that cut, I've essentially just maintained my weight, and I was curious to see exactly how strong I've gotten or to see if I've gained any strength at all, because typically when you're on the cut, you end up losing strength. So without further ado, let's see what those 1-rep maxes were. Jumping right into this, you can see that my first lift was going to be squats. My goal here was to kind of replicate what a powerlifting competition would be. So you're going to be doing your squats, then your bench, then your deadlift. With that said, on a squat, we're only looking at going 90 degrees. It doesn't have to be super deep or necessarily perfect form, but of course you should always prioritize your form if you're trying to build strength or muscle. To get started, you can see that I'm also using the barbell here, and I'm just going to work my way up with the barbell, 135 pounds, 225 pounds, and then up to 315. 315 is typically where I'll stop and I'll gauge how my body was feeling, and if it went up pretty well, then I'll start hitting some heavier numbers. And I have to say that at about 165 pounds, which would have been about 9 pounds lighter than my computing weight, 315 went up pretty well. You'll also see in this video that I chose to wear a belt as well as the knee sleeves because those are allowed in competition, and I want to make sure that I'm doing this as safely as possible. And for me personally, I feel like the belt definitely helps add a couple of extra pounds onto that PR. So with 315 feeling good, I went ahead and jumped to 335. Now, I know I can do more weight than this, but I wanted to see how it felt, and in my opinion, again, it moved pretty well, and I managed to hit that 90 degrees that we're looking for. So with 335 knocked out, I went ahead and made a big jump to 365. I don't typically go up 30 pounds at a time, but I wanted to prevent burning out, and I wanted to make sure that I felt strong enough to actually lift what I was putting on my back. You can see me struggling a little bit more here than the other lifts. I did manage to hit 90 degrees, but at the same time, it's not the deepest squat and it doesn't look as good as the other ones, but that's just my opinion, and it's something that I can improve on. However, I really want to push and see if I could manage to hit 385. That was the number that I hit last time I was in competition, and I felt like it was definitely doable. Plus, even though I didn't get super crazy depth on 365, I felt like it went up pretty well. Like, it moved and I wasn't struggling too much at the top. Also, a big shout out to my friend Biggie, of course, Aaron Johnson. He's got the Panthera motivational page on Instagram. I'll leave a link to his Instagram page, and definitely good content. Be sure to go check that out. He was there spotting me and making sure that all of these lifts were safe. And if you watch the powerlifting competitions that I put on way back on this channel, you probably recognize him. He hasn't been lifting as much, and he kind of just wanted to gauge what his 1-rep max would be. He wasn't going incredibly hard, but it was definitely nice to gauge where you're at whenever you're getting back into the rhythm of things. So shout out to him, and obviously great work, just trying to test his 1-rep maxes and trying to push himself and get back on track. You'll see that whenever Biggie went up for his PR, he hit 205, and I believe, if I remember correctly, we kind of discussed it, and he said he felt like he could do more, but since he was kind of getting back into the rhythm of things, he was just going to take it easy and not necessarily push it. However, I definitely think he could hit 225 if he chose to do so. But, sometimes it's nice to kind of just gauge where you're at instead of having a precise number. 1-rep maxes can be a bit overrated sometimes, so don't invest too much into that, because at the end of the day, you don't want to hurt yourself or push it too hard and end up having an injury that prevents you from allowing yourself to get stronger. And my final lift for squats was going to be 385. As you can see, the bar moves up pretty well, but I will say that one thing that I noticed in the mirror that you may not be able to catch on camera was that my right leg was kind of bending a little bit. It was a little bit of a shake, right? So we want to make sure that everything's nice and tight and we're pushing the bar up perfectly. With that said, I'm pretty content with this. So I went ahead and stopped at this point. There was no need to try and set a PR, even though this really matches my PR and I might have been able to do a little bit more, but in my opinion personally, adding more weight, especially whenever I was seeing signs of my form breakdown, just wasn't worth it. And again, since this is my first time trying 1-rep maxes since, I really went on a cut this summer, I really do feel good about my overall weight here. I mean, 385 is more than 2 times my weight. So pretty content with that at 165 pound body weight. Next, I decided to do the bench, again, following the same format as a regular powerlifting competition. And you'll also see me kind of just going through the motion, trying to practice my form, where my feet are gonna be sticking my chest out enough so that way my shoulder blades are touching the bench, but also my butt is touching the bench, because technically you're supposed to have a pause rep, both feet on the ground, your butt touching the bench and your shoulders touching the back. Also, your arms have to come down to at least 90 degrees, but I don't have a crazy arch in my back. I keep it relatively flat compared to some powerlifters, so I kind of just go through those motions as I'm warming up with something like 135 pounds or even sometimes 205, depending on how I'm feeling that day. So after hitting the bar and hitting 135 for a few reps, I jumped up to 225 just to gauge how it felt again, seeing if it felt pretty good. Once I got up to 225, I did decide to use the wrist straps. I don't necessarily need these, like I know I can do 225 for a few reps, so it wasn't necessary, but it was something that I just felt more comfortable having them on there. Kind of provides that mental clarity that I'm gonna be okay. And because it's starting to get into that heavier range, I feel like if your form does break down, it typically starts with your wrist kicking backwards. So I wanted to prevent that to see how far I could push this bench PR. Since 225 did go up pretty well for me, I went ahead and added a 10 and a 5 on each side, totaling 255 pounds. And I'm gonna say this rep was probably the worst out of all of the reps that I had in this entire video. Now, I don't wanna be too critical of myself necessarily, but I will say that my butt does come a little bit off of the bench and it wasn't a very long pause. Although I don't know if that would have helped me or hurt me. And the reason why I think it may help to have that pause in there sometimes is it allows you to have a little bit more leverage through your legs out to the bench, right, as you're pushing. So you never really know unless you actually know, right? You have to actually test those things out and see what feels best for you. In this case, I stopped here because 255 felt pretty hard. Not only did it feel hard, but I don't really want to hurt myself or push it too far to the point where I'm having shoulder injuries or anything like that. Again, I'm testing my 1 rep max, but this isn't going to be a true testament of what that max is. And while I didn't hit a PR, the heaviest I've ever hit is 275. I'm still pretty happy with this number because losing roughly 9 pounds since my last powerlifting competition, I didn't lose crazy strength. And the last time I did hit 275, it wasn't a pause rep, so it wouldn't have counted in competition. And the heaviest I've ever hit in competition was 265 on a pause rep. I never managed to hit 270 or 275. So instead of really beating myself up over this, I'm pretty comfortable with it. And by the way, whenever I was hitting those PRs, I was weighing closer to like 180, so I would have been about 15 pounds heavier. For me personally, I've noticed that whenever I'm bigger, I'm on a bulk or something along those lines, I tend to bench better. However, I'm not as big on bulking as I get older because for me personally, whenever my weight's in check and I'm a little bit leaner, typically my blood pressure tends to go down, so kind of pros and cons to the bulk. And for me personally, it's not worth getting a little bit stronger to have actual health issues. So I decided to stop here, and I probably won't bulk necessarily. Even if I do get bigger, I just plan on adding a couple of pounds of muscle or even a pound of muscle every year for the next few years. And staying true to the format I mentioned before, we're doing deadlifts now. With the deadlift, typically I don't use the bar to test it out just because a bar is 45 pounds and it doesn't really represent the full range of motion that you would have on a deadlift, assuming that you deadlift 135 pounds or more. So I went ahead and started with 135 pounds, worked up to 225, and then again, worked up to 315. And again, I'm making a shout out to Biggie because he hit 315 on deadlift, and while that might not be like the craziest amount of weight you've ever heard, for someone who hasn't been in the gym for a pretty long time, he hit it pretty well. So definitely a shout out to him, and it's nice seeing your friends kind of progress or even get back into these things. It's really difficult to take that first step, but if you watch my last video, then you know that it's all about making today day one instead of, pushing it on to tomorrow or next week or next year. So again, shout out to him. That's a big accomplishment in my opinion. And so definitely be sure to show him a little bit of love down in the comments. Because 315 moves so well, and because I've already done squats, I felt pretty warmed up and made the next jump to 405. 405 is actually the number that I've hit the last 2 powerlifting competitions that I've had, and so it's kind of been a little bit of a lull, and seeing it on camera, I can definitely tell that my right leg was starting to kind of cave in a little bit, sort of similar to what was happening on the squat, except a little bit more excessive. For me, this was kind of a good thing to see on camera because it made me realize that I might have some deficiencies or some muscle imbalances, particularly in my right leg. So I will say that if anything came out of this, it was definitely seeing that, I've got some things to work on in terms of imbalances and potentially allowing myself to get stronger if I start focusing on those things. But I wasn't done yet. I did have one more left in me, and today was the day that I finally went and tried 425 at this new weight where, I've come really close to hitting 425 in the past and haven't quite gotten it, but I've gotten about 3/4 of the way up, and it was just feeling good. And I knew as soon as I stepped up to that bar and pulled on that barbell, it wasn't happening. Unfortunately, no PRs today, but when I did pull that 425, it did give me something to really focus on and kind of gave myself a goal in terms of where I want to be in the next year. For me, hitting 425 would be a huge accomplishment, and I'm sure your favorite influencers, especially powerlifting influencers, are a lot stronger than this. But I'm pretty happy with my progress overall. The fact that I went from losing weight to maintaining most of my strength feels pretty good. And it allows me to kind of set some different goals for myself whenever I'm trying to stay motivated or, give myself a reason to be disciplined. Also, I do want to mention that on the deadlifts, there was bumper plates. I know that some people have this thing online where the bumper plates don't necessarily weigh the same as a regular 45-pound plate. In my opinion, it felt like 405, but that's just me. And, feel free to comment, bust me up a little bit about that below. I can take it. It's not really a big deal. Honestly, at the end of the day, I'm happy with my progress and what I'm doing because I feel like I'm taking steps forward. Even though I didn't hit any PRs, it feels like maintaining that strength at my current size is pretty good, especially for someone who weighs under 200 pounds, aka victim weight. So that's going to be it for today's video. Thank you if you made it this far. Please be sure to comment, like, and subscribe if you already have not. And for those of you who have been subscribing or are subscribed, I just want to say thank you. I appreciate everything that, you all have done in the past couple of months. I haven't been great at posting, so I really do appreciate you hanging in there with me and just allowing me to put out this content and for consuming it. So with that said, I'll see you all in the next video.